You won't believe what happens when you sprinkle this little thing. In seconds, worms come crowding in. Stick around, tip number 3 will change your garden forever. But before the secret is revealed, we meet a gardener who once struggled with lifeless soil, plants that barely grew, and the frustration of watching her hard work fade. She searched for answers, tried every trick in the book, until one simple sprinkle turned her soil into a living, breathing home for worms, nature's best helpers. Her journey shows how a small change can bring big results. And today, you'll see exactly how it works for your garden too. Meet Mrs. Hazel Morton. Though neighbors sometimes joked, she could pass for Mr. Fig's twin. In her 70s, edging into her 80s, Hazel carried with her a quiet strength and a lifelong love for nature. She was the kind of woman who saved glass jars, mended old baskets, and believed that frugality wasn't just about money, it was about respect for the earth. To Hazel, soil was not dirt to be tamed with bags of fertilizer from the store. It was living, breathing, and filled with unseen potential. She often said, "The soil holds more power than any bottle on a shelf." But for all her wisdom, Hazel faced the same heartbreak many gardeners know too well. One summer, her garden began to change. The beds that once produced lush greens and bright flowers turned stubborn. Plants withered before they had a chance. The soil felt heavy, dull, and strangely lifeless, no matter how much she watered or cared. For someone who always believed in the hidden strength beneath her feet, it was like losing an old friend. She could see the signs: fewer worms, no earthy smell, and plants that seemed to struggle for every breath. Hazel was determined not to give up. She wanted to prove that her belief in soil's power was right. This struggle set her on a journey, one that would uncover the secret sprinkle that could wake her garden back to life. The problem: soil lacking life, the garden that wouldn't grow. Hazel's garden had always been her pride: rows of beans climbing up twine, marigolds standing guard, tomatoes ripening under the sun. But slowly, something began to change. The soil that once crumbled softly in her hands began to feel heavy, hard, and strangely dull. When she pressed her fingers into it, there was no bounce, no earthy smell, no movement. The life seemed to have drained away. The plants mirrored the soil's struggle. Leaves yellowed before their time, curling at the edges as if sighing for help. Seedlings pushed through, but instead of racing toward the sky, they stalled, small, weak, and fragile. Flowers bloomed timidly, then dropped before setting fruit. Hazel bent low one morning, digging around with her trowel, hoping to find her old companions, the wriggling earthworms that once filled the soil with energy. But only one surfaced, thin and pale, disappearing quickly as if embarrassed. She knew what many gardeners might try: compost, manure, even a sprinkle of chemical fertilizer to jolt the soil back to life. Hazel tried them all. She faithfully turned in her kitchen scraps, layered her compost heap, and spread manure with care. For a while, she thought it might help: a slight green flush, a few stronger leaves. But within weeks, the garden sank back into its tired state. It was like pouring water into a cracked pot. Nothing held. Her neighbors suggested she give up and switch to store-bought soil. "At your age, Hazel, why not make it easier?" They teased kindly, but she couldn't bring herself to abandon the patch of earth she had tended for decades. She believed deep down that soil wasn't just dirt to be replaced. It was a partner, a friend that needed healing, not discarding. And if she could just find the missing piece, she knew her garden would come alive again. So every morning, Hazel walked her rows, studying the drooping plants, watching the way the earth dried faster than it used to, noticing the silence where once insects and worms bustled. And every night, she leafed through her old gardening journals, desperate for a clue she might have missed. Her heart ached, but she held on to a stubborn hope. After all, she had lived long enough to know that even the most lifeless seasons can turn. And then, almost by accident, she stumbled upon one tiny additive. Not a chemical, not an expensive solution, just a sprinkle of something so simple. It almost seemed laughable. Yet what happened next would transform her garden, and her belief in the hidden power of soil forever. The secret sprinkle revealed what she sprinkled that attracted worms. One morning, as Hazel sorted through her kitchen scraps, she paused over something she had always tossed aside without a second thought: the remnants of her morning coffee and small bowl of crushed eggshells. For years, she had seen other gardeners mention them, but she never gave them much weight. That day, however, something nudged her to try. Instead of tossing them into the compost heap, she walked out to her failing garden and sprinkled the mixture lightly across the soil. It felt almost too simple, almost silly. But what happened next would leave her amazed. Within a few days, the soil began to change. Hazel noticed moisture clinging longer to the ground where she had sprinkled. A few days later, when she gently turned the soil with her trowel, she gasped. Wriggling earthworms, plump and lively, were moving through the earth. They hadn't been there in weeks. It was as though her sprinkle had called them home. The secret wasn't magic. It was science hidden in everyday scraps. Coffee grounds added nitrogen, a food worms crave, while the crushed eggshells offered calcium, balancing the soil and keeping it from turning too acidic. Compost tea, when she later tried it, carried billions of living microbes that coated the soil with life. These ingredients weren't just feeding her plants. They were feeding the underground workers that make soil thrive. And worms, as Hazel quickly learned, are not just visitors. They are the engineers of the soil. As they tunnel, they aerate the earth, letting air and water seep deep to the roots. Their castings, the polite word for worm, droppings, are packed with nutrients in a form plants can drink up immediately. Every wiggle, every bite, every casting turns tired ground into a fertile powerhouse. The transformation was quiet, almost invisible at first, but Hazel began to notice her plants standing taller, their leaves a deeper shade of green, the soil darker and crumblier in her hands. It was as if the garden was waking up, and she couldn't help but smile, realizing that something so small, so frugal, could hold such power. Her discovery wasn't expensive. It wasn't complicated. It was accessible to anyone willing to look at their kitchen scraps differently. Worms didn't just appear, they were invited, welcomed with food, shelter, and care. And once they came, they stayed, turning Hazel's weak soil into a living, breathing ecosystem again. But Hazel didn't stop there. If a sprinkle could bring worms back, she wondered, what if she gave them a reason to stay, to multiply, to build her soil into something richer than she had ever known? Wait till you see what she did next. It turned those worms into full-time soil engineers. Tip 1. Build soft paths and mulch wisely. Let worms travel safely. Hazel soon realized that bringing worms back was only the first step. To keep them thriving, she needed to make her garden a place where they could move freely, eat well, and do their quiet work without interruption. The first lesson she learned was about the ground itself, the way she treated her garden paths. For years, Hazel had walked the same narrow rows, pushing her wheelbarrow, carrying watering cans, and pressing her boots into the soil. Over time, those paths became hard-packed, almost like brick. When she dug into them, she found few worms. They couldn't travel easily through the dense ground, and the compacted areas created invisible walls that limited their movement. So, Hazel made a simple change. Instead of trampling her soil, she built soft paths. She marked out dedicated walkways and covered them with straw, wood chips, or fallen leaves. Not only did it keep her boots from pressing the earth flat, but it also created a soft, moist layer that worms loved to hide under. The mulch acted like a blanket, keeping the soil cooler in summer, warmer in winter, and always damp enough to welcome life. She experimented with different materials. Shredded leaves from her autumn rake-ups decomposed quickly, creating a rich, dark layer that drew worms in droves. Wood chips lasted longer, protecting the soil surface while giving her garden a tidy look. Even simple grass clippings worked, provided she spread them thinly so they wouldn't mat down. Wherever she added mulch, the ground stayed loose and spongy, easy for worms to tunnel, easy for roots to grow. The change was dramatic. Plants along these mulched paths stood stronger, their roots finding new channels where worms had burrowed. Hazel noticed her watering cans went further too. The soil held moisture instead of drying to dust. And as she walked, she smiled at the crunch of leaves and the soft give under her feet, knowing she was no longer suffocating the very life she was trying to protect. Her wisdom was simple but profound. Don't just invite worms into your garden. Give them safe passage. Every gardener has to walk somewhere, but choosing to walk wisely means worms can travel, roots can breathe, and the soil becomes a network of life instead of a battlefield of compaction. And Hazel didn't stop there. She had another trick up her sleeve, one that went beyond giving worms a safe place to live. It was about feeding them something irresistible, a treat that would keep them working day and night, turning her garden into a self-sustaining paradise. Tip 2. Feed with organic waste. Worms love this buffet. Hazel had given her worms safe passage with soft paths and mulch, but she knew travelers don't stay unless they're fed. So, she asked herself, what do worms truly love to eat? The answer was already in her kitchen. Every day, she peeled carrots, cracked eggs, brewed her coffee, and trimmed vegetables for her meals. Instead of tossing those scraps away, she began treating them as a banquet for her underground workers. She started small. One morning, she dug a shallow trench along her tomato bed and tipped in potato peelings, onion skins, and crumbled eggshells. She covered it lightly with soil and walked away. A week later, when she checked, the scraps had nearly vanished. In their place, the soil was loose and dark, and wriggling worms were busy feasting. Hazel laughed out loud. It looked like a secret dining hall beneath her feet. Over time, she experimented with different methods. Sometimes she buried scraps in small pockets between plants, almost like tucking snacks in the soil. Other times, she scattered them lightly under her mulch, letting the leaves and wood chips cover them until worms came to claim their meal. And in the corners of her garden, she dug trenches where she deposited larger amounts of waste, melon rinds, cabbage leaves, corn husks. These trenches became long buffets, breaking down slowly while feeding worms for weeks. What made this work wasn't just the scraps themselves, but the process of decomposition. As peels, shells, and grounds broke down, they released nutrients into the soil and created a feast of microbes. Worms love these microbes. They slurp them up along with the softening food, turning every bite into energy for tunneling and casting. And those castings? They're nature's richest fertilizer, packed with nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and trace minerals that plants can absorb immediately. Hazel began to see the results in her garden. Plants that once struggled now looked lush, their leaves a deeper green, their flowers brighter and longer lasting. Water soaked in easily, roots spread deeper, and the soil practically crumbled in her hands. Every scrap she saved from the kitchen, banana peels, coffee grounds, eggshells, was no longer waste. It was fuel, life, and growth. Her frugality, the same habit that made her save jars and mend baskets, was now feeding an army of soil engineers. She realized she wasn't just gardening. She was partnering with nature, closing a loop that turned her leftovers into abundance. And yet, the most surprising change was still to come. Hazel wasn't content with a garden that just looked healthier. She wanted to see multiplication, worms not just surviving, but exploding in numbers, turning her garden into a living ecosystem. Tip 3. Sprinkle that activation mixture, the magic dust. Hazel's biggest leap wasn't a secret potion. It was a simple, balanced sprinkle that wakes the soil. Think of this as a light invitation. Food plus microbes plus moisture equals a worm party. Here's exactly how she did it, when, and how not to overdo it. Quick recipe, activation mix. 2 parts used coffee grounds, dry. 1 part crushed / ground eggshells, powdered if possible. 1 part well-rotted compost or a splash of compost tea, diluted. Mix dry ingredients first. If using compost tea, dilute it before applying. When to apply? Early morning or late afternoon / evening. Soil is cooler and moist. During the active growing season, every 2 to 4 weeks. Skip heavy application in soggy, waterlogged soil. How much and where? Step by step. 1. Test. Try a small 1 square meter patch first so you can watch results. 2. For single seedlings, a light dusting. About 1 teaspoon of the dry mix around, not on, the stem. 3. For established plants, 1 to 2 tablespoons. Placed in a ring 5, 10 cm, 2. -4 inches, from the stem. 4. For beds, spread a thin, even layer. Think a handful per square foot / 1 cup per square meter. Do not pile. 5. After sprinkling, gently rake or press the mix into the top 1 to 2 cm of soil or cover with a thin layer of mulch so it won't bake in the sun. 6. Water lightly to activate. Moist conditions let microbes multiply and signal worms. Cautions: don't mound fresh. Coffee grounds thickly, in layers. They can compact and repel worms. Use thin, mixed-in amounts. Eggshells take time to break down. Crushing speeds benefit. Avoid sprinkling directly on tiny seedlings' crowns. Keep material around the roots. If soil is already very acidic, use smaller amounts of coffee grounds and monitor plant response. Why it works? Coffee grounds add nitrogen and microbial food. Eggshells supply calcium and buffering. Compost/compost tea brings living microbes. Together, they raise microbial activity and moisture, the signals worms follow. Worms arrive, tunnel, and leave nutrient-rich castings that plants drink up. Hazel waited a few days, then a week, and the soil answered. In days, she saw the garden awaken. Watch the results unfold, from bare soil to worm highways. At first glance, Hazel's soil looked ordinary, cracked in places, pale and tired. On day 0, it was the kind of earth that made plants struggle, the kind that seemed to drink water but give nothing back. She sprinkled her activation mixture gently, covered it with mulch, and watered with quiet hope. Then she waited. By day 7, subtle changes began to show. When Hazel bent down and brushed back the mulch, she noticed small tunnels cutting through the soil, like hidden roadways beneath the surface. A few worm castings dotted the ground, tiny, coiled nuggets of living fertilizer. The soil felt different in her hands, softer, spongier, and beginning to hold more moisture. Her plants, once hesitant, stood a little taller, their leaves a shade greener, their stems firmer. By day 14, the transformation was undeniable. The once lifeless soil had darkened into a richer brown, with visible aggregates forming, proof that microbes and worms were building structure underground. When she pushed her trowel into the earth, it slid down easily, and the soil crumbled instead of clumping. Worms wriggled up almost instantly, healthy and plump, like workers on a bustling job site. The tunnels ran everywhere, true worm highways that carried air, water, and nutrients deep into the garden. Above ground, the plants mirrored this revival. Tomatoes sprouted new blossoms. Leafy greens unfurled broad, vibrant leaves. Even the flowers, once sparse, now opened wide, drawing bees and butterflies. The entire garden buzzed with life, as if it had taken a deep breath after years of silence. Hazel would often sit with her cup of tea, watching these changes unfold like a slow miracle. She thought back to when the soil was heavy and silent, and the contrast made her smile. She had not bought expensive fertilizers or relied on quick-fix chemicals. Instead, she had partnered with the smallest of helpers, worms, microbes, and her own kitchen scraps. But as beautiful as the results were, Hazel knew the work wasn't over. Soil is a living system, and living things need care. Worms could vanish if the environment turned harsh again, too dry, too compacted, or starved of food. If she wanted these worm highways to last, she would need to maintain them, gently but consistently. And so, her next chapter began, learning how to keep the life she had awakened, thriving year after year. Tip 4. Maintain with gentle care. Keep the worms happy. Hazel had learned that bringing worms back was a victory, but keeping them meant practicing steady, gentle care. Soil is alive, just like the garden itself, and it remembers how it's treated. If she wanted her worm highways to thrive, she couldn't go back to old habits. The first rule she embraced was no harsh disturbance. In her younger years, Hazel would turn the soil with her spade every season, believing she was refreshing it. But she now realized that tilling destroyed the very tunnels worms worked so hard to build, tearing apart their hidden world. Instead, she shifted to light handwork, loosening the surface only when planting and letting the worms do the deeper turning. Next, she vowed to keep her soil chemical-free. It was tempting, when weeds grew stubborn or insects chewed a leaf or two, to reach for sprays and powders. But Hazel knew those quick fixes came at a cost. They poisoned not only the pests, but also the microbes and worms she depended on. Instead, she leaned on natural solutions, companion planting, neem sprays, and patience. She often said with a smile, "Healthy soil defends itself." Moisture, too, was essential. Worms breathe through their skin, which means dry soil is deadly for them. Hazel made it her habit to water deeply, but not too often, keeping the soil moist without drowning it. She loved watching droplets soak through the mulch, knowing every sip was reaching her underground allies. She also kept feeding them. Once a month, she added small amounts of organic matter, kitchen scraps, leaves, or her special sprinkle mixture. But instead of scattering everything in one spot, she rotated zones. This way, worms moved freely across the entire garden, spreading fertility evenly instead of clustering in one place. Her care was quiet, almost invisible to anyone passing by. Yet, the results were written in her plant's strength, her soil's richness, and the countless tiny worm castings she found whenever she knelt down to look. Hazel often thought of it like tending friendships, steady kindness, gentle handling, and never taking the relationship for granted. Her garden wasn't just alive, it was thriving, resilient, and generous. And in the soft rustle of leaves, in the silent work of worms beneath her feet, Hazel began to notice something deeper than gardening alone. Lessons from the earth. Hazel often found herself pausing in her garden, her hands resting in the soil, just listening. The quiet hum of bees, the whisper of leaves, the unseen stirrings underground, they all spoke to her in ways words rarely could. She began to see her garden not only as a place of food and flowers, but as a mirror of life itself. The worms had taught her something profound. They were small, almost invisible, yet their steady, humble work transformed lifeless ground into rich, fertile earth. Hazel realized it was the same with people. Big changes don't always come from grand gestures or sudden breakthroughs. They come from the little things, a kind word, a daily habit, a gentle act of care. Just as worms revive soil grain by grain, small acts revive life moment by moment. She smiled at the thought that it was never too late to start again. At 70-something, Hazel had revived her garden when many thought she was past her prime. And yet, the soil responded. The worms returned, and the plants bloomed brighter than before. It was a reminder to her, and to anyone watching, that nothing is ever truly finished. Old soil can be renewed. Forgotten scraps can find purpose. And tired seasons of life can blossom again with the right care. Her frugality, once thought of as a quirk, now felt like wisdom. By reusing what others threw away, she had built abundance. By choosing patience over quick fixes, she had restored balance. And by believing in the quiet power of the earth, she had discovered a truth. Revival doesn't take much, only consistency, gentleness, and faith that small efforts matter. Hazel's journey is not just about gardening. It's about life, resilience, and the hope that renewal is always possible. Worms brought life back to her soil, and in a way, they brought meaning back to her days. And now, the lesson is yours. Have you seen signs of life in your soil? Have you tried feeding your garden scraps instead of throwing them away? Share your thoughts, your own tips, or simply your story in the comments. And if Hazel's journey inspired you, give this video a like, share it with a friend, and subscribe because the earth has many more lessons waiting to be told. So now it's your turn. Hazel showed us how a simple sprinkle can wake the soil, invite worms back, and bring a tired garden to life. But the real story begins when you try it. What will you sprinkle first? Will it be coffee grounds from this morning's cup, a handful of crushed eggshells, or maybe some compost tea bubbling in a jar? Share it with us in the comments. We'd love to hear your experiments, your results, and even your surprises. If Hazel's journey encouraged you, take a moment to give this video a like. It may seem small, but just like the worms, small actions make a big difference. Share this with a friend or neighbor who's been struggling with their garden. And let's spread the joy of soil revival together. And don't forget to subscribe, because this is only the beginning. Next week, we'll take the story one step further. How to turn those worm castings into a powerful liquid fertilizer, nature's own plant tonic, and use it to supercharge growth. You won't want to miss it. Until then, here's to gardens that age beautifully, just like us. May your soil stay rich, your worms stay busy, and your heart stay connected to the lessons the earth quietly teaches every day. Before we close, let's take a gentle moment to look back on Hazel's garden journey and the simple steps that transformed lifeless soil into a living, breathing ecosystem. Think of this as your quick recap. 3 slides of wisdom you can carry right into your own backyard. Slide 1, Tip 1, prepare the soil gently. We started by softening the ground, loosening the top layer, and making space for life to enter. Just like preparing a home for guests, the soil needed to feel welcoming. The first act of care was not about adding, but about opening. a reminder that growth begins with creating room for change. Slide 2. Tip 2. Feed with organic waste. Next, we laid out the buffet: vegetable peels, coffee grounds, crushed eggshells. Nothing fancy, nothing expensive. Just the humble scraps of everyday life becoming food for worms. The message here? What we often throw away still holds value, and when returned to the earth, it becomes a gift that multiplies. Slide 3. Tip 3. Sprinkle the magic dust. Then came the moment of magic. Sprinkling that gentle activation mix at the base of plants. Not too much, not too little, and always with care. Like seasoning a meal, it brought flavor and spark to the soil, waking up its hidden potential. Slide 4. Tip 4. Maintain with gentle care. And finally, the steady rhythm. Keep the soil moist. Avoid harsh chemicals. Feed lightly month by month. Because health is not a one-time act. It's a practice of small, consistent kindnesses that build strength over time. The message is simple. Gardens thrive on patience, consistency, and love. And so do we. The soil's renewal is not just Hazel's story. It's a mirror of our own lives, proof that even tired, worn-out places can bloom again with care.